Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you today. You cannot make heads or tails of what's going on in this country right now and in this world. But one of the persons to whom I turn is one of Minneapolis' own, AM 950 Radio's own, Colleen Rowley, FBI whistleblower. This troublemaker is always giving us so much information, and we just love having her on the show. And we've got to talk about being on the verge of World War III. That's something that certainly many of us never thought we'd be talking about. But with all of the conflagrations in critical parts of the world, that is a real threat. It's a very real worry for many of us. When you look at the nuclear clock, we're closer than ever than we've ever been, I don't know if ever, to a nuclear doom. And so President Trump did something very, very interesting. He wants denuclearization. He wants to talk to Russia and China. And then we've got what's happening in Ukraine. What is going to happen there? What does all of this mean? I said, well, let me go to Colleen Rowley to talk about this. And I want you to meet me over on Blue Sky. SantitaJackson.bsky.social. I'm still on X at SantitaJ, and I am on Santita Jackson and Friends. That's my Facebook page and the Santita Jackson Show. Hey, Robert and Bernadette. Shalom, Robert. Sending you so much love. Everybody continue to like and share. Colleen Rowley, I don't even know where you want to begin. Every day I'm getting surprised by something. And then, it's very interesting. It seems that, I've considered myself to be a progressive, but I'm at odds with many progressives on Ukraine, on war, on matters of war and peace, as we engage in political dialogue, I can find the vitriol on both sides. I said, wait a minute. I thought we were looking for peace and that we were going to be what we're looking for. So I need you to help me to understand what is this moment in which we find ourselves, in which this man who's known for his belligerence, but quite frankly, in 2016, he was saying that we have too many, basically, he said what Obama said, but it sounded like he was like really into it. He was like, these wars are ridiculous. And he took another step and went to North Korea. He was talking to Putin. I don't know how that's a bad thing to be talking to even people with whom you are at odds. You take it away, because I'm trying to figure it all out.
It's at best a challenging environment to try to figure out where everything is going. And there's just surprises. It's like a roller coaster. I told people for a long time now, fasten your seatbelt. Fasten your seatbelt, because as soon as you think where it might be going, it's going to change. That's frankly Trump's mode. And you just brought up that good example of way back in 2016 when he was threatening to nuke North Korea with this nonsense about my button is bigger than your button or something like that. And everybody was like, oh my gosh, we're going to war with North Korea. And literally within, I don't even know if it was just days or
minutes,
weeks, he was sitting there hugging the president of North Korea and crossing back and forth across the demilitarized zone. So it just went 180 degrees. And if you see that, I think if you actually are looking at Trump psychologically, I think that he learned a lot from that reality show, which is to always keep them guessing and to come off as a bluffer. It's like playing poker when you bluff. And he saw that was a mode. It works really fine when you're the apprentice or whatever it was called. I never watched, by the way. I never watched that reality show. But I know just from the snippets I saw of it that it was, something that taught him that bluffing and bombastic talk, pretending like you're all powerful, and basically then, switching to the opposite mode.
No, he said
And
that
so
was part of the deal. That was in his that was in his book. That he'd have people bring out, machinery like they had broken ground for hotels, and they had not done a thing. And he
you
said,
know,
but I'm creating the impression. So I said, oh,
you know, Nixon, he was maybe taking off a little bit on Nixon, which is to try to make people think he was crazy. And that actually, Trump has rationalized why he had Bolton. Bolton, by the way, is not like this. Bolton is a solid war hawk. He's never deviated. He wants to bomb everyone in the world, and he's war. Bolton is war. But why did Trump hire him if, in fact, he wanted to make some peace in the world? Well, the explanation, according to Trump, is he wanted to make people not know what he was doing. Again, it's just like keep people guessing. So it is a challenge if you really are an analyst and trying to be open source. In my case, all I can do is read, but no one can keep up with it because things are changing. Already today, I saw meetings in Europe, and I haven't even looked at them, but the Europeans are panic struck that now, after all these, what it was, 3 years of telling Europe that we have to make the Ukrainians fight against the Russians, after 3 years of this, and everyone sending their stockpiles of tanks and bombs and certainly money to Ukraine, all of a sudden Europe looks at it and says, oh, you're pulling the rug out from under us because you're saying now you're on your own, Europe. If you want to do this, go ahead, fine. But the United States is no longer a part of it. That's what Trump was, and actually it wasn't Trump, but it was Hegseth and Vance said this in not so many words. And of course, yeah, they're panicking. They're having more meetings. Now, what can we do? Is there a way that the Europe can fill the gap if the U.S. does pull out of Ukraine? I mean, so if you are really wanting to know what's going on, you not only have to be reading every single day, every single hour, you'd have to be a speed reader, and you'd have to be in touch with some of these analysts out there who have been looking at the international situation now for a long time, years. And I do look at, I do a shortcut, which is I pay attention to some of the international analysts who, by the way, I look at track record. If they don't get it right, then I don't pay as much attention to the analysts who don't get it right. If Colin Powell, rest in peace, was out there telling me something, I probably would not pay a lot of attention to it because I know Colin Powell was politicized and lied about weapons of mass destruction, etc. But some of these analysts who are now gaining a following on different social media and have literally been correct a lot of times, they're worth looking at. And then everyone has to make up their own mind because I said this many times, the truth is a zigzag line. And in fact, the two parties, Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives, they can be correct about some things, but none of them are correct about everything because they have really agendas. All the political parties, to be honest, the definition of a political party is that it has an agenda. It has an agenda of winning and gaining power. And so you have to be very careful if you're siloed into one side or the other, either the liberals or the conservatives. But you also have to read them both because you have to figure out for yourself where that truth, that zigzag line is. Now, with Trump, his latest this latest overture to try to negotiate an end to the Ukrainian war. To be honest, for the peace side, the otherwise what we would call, these used to be the liberals. And, the liberals kind of went war hawkish under Obama and Biden. So you can't really call them liberals, but there still is, whether you want to call it progressive peace, but there is still a group of people who want peace in the world. People might say it's idealist to want peace in the world, but that group was buoyed. They literally were buoyed by the fact that Pete Hegseth and Vance now have gone along and said, yeah, we got to start negotiating. The reality is Russia is at this point, we can't continue to fund until mislead Ukrainians. For 3 years, we have misled them in saying, well, we're behind you. You fight for freedom against Russia. This was never the case. Some of our leaders in the United States admitted from the start, we're only funding Ukrainians and using them as cannon fodder. Literally, I think 600, 700,000 Ukrainian young men, mostly young men, have been killed because these leaders, including Lindsey Graham, but including a whole bunch of people, said there are proxies and we're using them to, quote unquote, weaken Russia. We did this before with the Zbigniew Brzezinski in Afghanistan. We funded the Mujahideen, which were bin Laden and the Taliban. We funded them to, quote unquote, weaken the Soviet Union. And it worked so well that the foreign policy cabal, which people call the deep state, or I would call the blob, the blob in Washington, D.C., actually glommed onto that notion that you could get proxy forces to fight against your so-called enemies. Well, it hasn't worked. It actually, frankly, didn't even work that well the first time, because bin Laden eventually, the whole bin Laden Al-Qaeda people that we weaponized and used, that boomeranged back on us on 9/11. So, this is the thing, is lots of the people, I would say the peace oriented side, actually was happy to hear that negotiations will begin. And they were happy to hear that Hegseth said, the reality is we can't give back Crimea. Crimea is like 90% Russian. And to say that you're going to give Crimea back to Ukraine, and the Donbass is very similar. And he said, you know what, that we're going to have to start from where we're at now. And then he also said that this was a lie. Biden misled Ukraine to make them think they could join NATO. In which case, once they're in NATO, then the U.S. is part of this, a kind of a World War II splitting up of the world's powers. And, that was always a lie. And Hegseth and Vance said, no, Ukraine is not going to be allowed into NATO. Well, so there's a real basis now for fruitful negotiations with Russia. Okay, with that said, am I overly Pollyanna optimist that this will settle things? Absolutely not. I keep telling people, okay, hope for the best. It's looking like there's a legitimate basis for hope. But to be honest, don't hold your breath, because anything can happen. And that cabal out there, and actually, frankly, Europe wants to somehow, get this go. They're very mad. They want to keep this going. And if you remember, Boris Johnson is the one who even ended that first peace agreement with, if we would have had the peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia, that was only a few months after it started, we wouldn't have this 700,000 Ukrainians dead.
Well, was he our
but Boris Johnson went into Ukraine and said, no, we've got your back. Keep fighting. Keep using these poor Ukrainian soldiers as cannon fodder.
Well, my question for you was he our proxy? Of course, he's out of office now. But, because when I see the United States and Great Britain specifically, I see them walking and working in lockstep.
Mm-hmm.
I could be.
Yeah. Most of Europe, a lot of people, I know when this was first starting, there were a lot of, so-called independent analysts who actually thought that Germany would stand up more against this. If you go all the way back to the Iraq War and the fact that the United States was trying to lie Europe into being what they called the coalition of the willing. And actually, in that case, France, it was the French official Chirac, I think, and he stood up and he said, you know what? You don't have any evidence about weapons of mass destruction. This is going to be a bad idea. So if you went back, Europe had some independent thought. And there was this notion at the start of going to war with a nuclear superpower, Russia, that there would be more people in Europe that would stand up. I kind of was like in the middle. I kind of said, who knows? You know, who knows how much power they have over Schultz in Germany and Macron and whatever. And in fact, I wasn't, you know, it was kind of sad that they just became lapdogs. And now Europe is in serious trouble.
Why do you say? Why are they?
Well, they've sacrificed a lot of their cheaper sources of energy, which would have come through to them through the Nord Stream and other ways too. But they had, you know, Volkswagen is a good example in Germany. They were wealthy. This was a lot of the manufacturing in Germany was really helpful to the German economy. Guess what? After the U.S. said go to war in Ukraine, their energy costs have gone way up. And even the last couple of winters, there's been a lot of fear that the German households would not even be able to pay for heating their houses during winter. You know, they're in trouble. They're in trouble economically. And it's largely because they decided, their leaders, I shouldn't say they, because the people are not there. But the leaders, again, were so co-opted by the neoconservatives and the neoliberals in the United States that they have sacrificed a lot of their own economy. And what you see now it's like Trump in a way. You know, when the price of eggs goes up domestically and the people decide, you know what, Biden's not doing so well for us. The price of eggs has gone up. Let's look at his opposition. And I think that's what's happened in Europe. A lot of the earlier opposition to the establishment power politicians in Europe have gotten they've gotten more votes and more support. This is one of the things when Vance went over there. Now, European power, the cabal that is still in power, is obviously trying to suppress their rivals, their political rivals. And their political rivals are like Trump, more on the right. So when Vance went over, he gave him a little lecture that this is, you know, violating the freedom of speech and First Amendment, and it's a bad idea. You should have, quote unquote, democracy that we always talk about, you know, spreading democracy. And yet Europe now has some laws that have actually curtailed freedom of speech. I know of gosh, how many now? I mean, a half a dozen commentators that were basically commentators on the peace side. There was a guy in a couple of them in the UK, Richard Medhurst, who talks all the time about peace in Gaza. There was another one, what's his name? Oh gosh, starts with a K. And but they were arresting Clarenberg. Kit Clarenberg is the other one. There's more. And they started in Europe arresting people for being for peace, because they're going to say they're anti-Semitic and hate speech. They have these laws that are very weird. They're murky, and they can use them now. They're anti-terrorism laws, but they're very broad, and they can use these now to suppress freedom of speech. They can also use them to suppress political opposition. And you know, so Vance gave a little lecture. I mean, by the way, that's good. That's a good thing. I mean, Vance may have a lot of flaws, and he may have a lot of other problems, same as Trump. But, you know, when there is something good about what they're doing, you can't get caught up in these silos and say, oh, they're all fascists, Trump and I have colleagues actually that do that. they've fallen into this Kool-Aid where they say that anything, they go by the person as opposed to the action. And instead of looking at things as good, mixed bags and whatever, they've already made their decision. Trump is a fascist, and therefore anything that he does, if he calls for ending the Ukraine war, that must be bad. There are people like that. I'm very disappointed to see that in some of even people I know. One person who recently did it really horribly was Tom Hartman on the left. And I always thought, well, Tom Hartman, he's more on the left. He was more for peace. He certainly was really good against Bush's wars when this first started. And then when Trump tries to call for negotiations with Russia to end the war in Ukraine, he writes a piece, and the title was basically, it was calling Putin a butcher, and therefore the fact that Trump is trying to negotiate with Putin makes him Neville Chamberlain. I mean, unbelievable, so, but that is because that far side is so brainwashed, and they go by what they're told from their leadership. The top leaders tell them. And it's sad because I think that, there's good and bad about all of this, and don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'm not willing to say Trump is a saint. People are saying if he does end the war in Ukraine, he would be nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. And so I wouldn't quite go that far, to be honest, because Trump is, who knows, but I think that what you can do is you can applaud if he makes peace in Ukraine and ends that war. That should be applauded, whether he gets the Nobel Peace Prize or not. He should be applauded. We gave the Nobel Peace Prize to Obama just as he was surging more war in Afghanistan.
He gotten into office. I mean, I was like, he hasn't. Is this an aspirational prize now? I mean, because it was because he had just gotten into office. He had not been able to do anything yet. Yeah. Really, I mean, it was just like it was such a shock, and so that's why I'm trying to find out. If we are supposed to be moving toward a peace, look, I'm still trying to figure out why they're pushing so hard for NATO. I mean, Eisenhower told us this was supposed to be a 10-year experiment, right? And so he said, now, if we're still in this after 10 years and something is not right, we got to scrap this and do something else. This is because so what are we doing here? I mean, what is the point there now?
Well, going back to the Nobel Peace Prize, absolutely, they gave the prize to Obama as an aspirational thing, hoping that he would reduce nuclear weapons as he had announced beforehand, hoping that he would somehow reduce, if not end, the war in Afghanistan. And I actually challenged the secretary of the Nobel Peace Prize. What was his name? I'm on a YouTube where I asked him if they didn't want to take it back. What was his name? It's a YouTube. It actually got a couple thousand views at the time because he couldn't answer. He's a Norwegian guy. Mm-hmm. And he basically said, what we pick them. We get to pick. We are the ones who get to pick. And you know what? When we pick wrong, he basically said at the time, we stick with it. Even if it turns out to be a wrong selection, we stick with it. Well, obviously with Obama, it was a wrong selection. Mm-hmm. He was already announcing a surge in Afghanistan as he accepted it. He went against Martin Luther King's speech and said, yeah, well, Martin Luther King wasn't entirely right. We have to have war. He basically rationalized and justified war, accepting the Nobel Peace Prize. And again, when I challenged that secretary, he kind of mumbled. He didn't really have a good answer. I don't know for a fact, but I think afterwards they actually officially regretted giving the prize to Obama because, you're absolutely right. It waters it down. It makes people lose respect for it. I mean, there's a lot of downsides when you do this kind of thing. And, to be honest, if Trump does as he has now indicated and is able to end the Ukrainian war, I would not give him a Nobel Peace Prize until we know for a fact that's happened. Not just because of talk, not just make it aspirational and applauding him before it's happened. Maybe with South Africa, they gave the prize to both Mandela and to
Bota.
who?
Bota.
Yeah, right. They gave that prize to the two, whatever, but it was long after it had already happened. And so, that's what you have to do. I don't care how great an analyst you are. I defy anyone to predict the future. And that's where people get caught up in thinking they know the future. It's not possible things can go, we can be on a really bad trajectory. We were on a really bad trajectory at the end of the Biden administration because they had determined they were going to try to box Trump in by launching missiles on Russia, by allowing Ukraine to launch U.S. missiles onto a nuclear superpower. And that means that we were this close to actual World War III nuclear war. It was a very precarious time. Even the doomsday clock lowered the time. They can't lower it. It's 89 seconds now. They're very careful because they know they can't reduce the time to nuclear war too much more. But it was precarious. And again, now it's looking like at least between nuclear superpowers, that doesn't mean that the global South. That does not include Africa, South America, global South. Who knows what kind of voice they would have. But there is at least some legitimate hope that with the very big powers that they could reach a more entente about multipolar power, sharing multipolar power, at least between the big three, US, Russia, and China. And then maybe bring in Europe, in some of the other powerful. And again, this is better. It's not an end all be all solution. It's not the ideal solution. You would want a more ideal solution of even fuller democracy. However, it's a lot better than the United States saying we're seeking unipolar power over the world, full spectrum dominance. And if our soft power does not work through economic sanctions, as by the way, it's not working anymore, our economic power at nearly $37 trillion of national debt and the fragile reserve currency of the dollar right now is not working in the world. That, it's called soft power, economic power, and there's other forms of soft power. But you know what? They don't seem to be working very well anymore, and we had to start resorting to hard military force. And at this point, you hope that there are smart. Again, I'm just an average person reading the news. I did study international law when I was young, and I'm pretty aware of all of this geopolitical power mongering, beginning with Kennan and Zbigniew Brzezinski and Kissinger. You look at the history of all of this, and I'm pretty aware of all of that. But still, I would think that there are people in more positions of power than someone sitting in their house in Minnesota that would understand reality. And the reality now is that we really have to look at a multipolar power sharing world. And the reason is we don't want the whole world to go up in smoke. And sometimes when you look at a Lindsey Graham, back in history, Curtis LeMay and these people that were the Dr. Strangelove movie was based on, there are still people. Bolton is one. There are still people at the higher levels of government who don't understand this. And they're almost so psychopathic that they're willing to gamble with the whole entire future of planet Earth. And again, why? For power, for this full spectrum dominance. And let's hope that Trump and some of the people that Trump has gathered around him are just a little smarter. Before we end, I do want to say something because a lot of the better nominees, not that they're perfect, far be it, they're not perfect, but Tulsi Gabbard, who frankly did stand up to Obama and administrations on Syria. She knew that the Syria Operation Timber Sycamore and whatever was a lie. She knew a lot of these things. You know what? She stood up on it. She knew that we were partnering with Al Qaeda in Syria, as Jake Sullivan said in an email, and she stood up on it. You know, she turns out to be correct. Why in the heck would we have been siding with Al Qaeda, Al Nusra in Syria? She was completely correct on that issue. Then there's Robert Kennedy. And to be honest, Robert Kennedy stood up to a big pharma megaloth. You know, people were dying of COVID, the COVID-19. Now even our FBI and CIA admit that it's likely was manufactured funded by Fauci. And Robert Kennedy gave talks about this. He was pilloried by the establishment cabal. Both Robert Kennedy and Tulsi have made it into the cabinet. And again, you know, it's not to say they're perfect. I don't agree with them on a lot of things. And one of the things I don't agree with them is on Israel and Gaza. However, they have shown that they had strength of character, and that they will go back to my zigzag line. They will stand up to power when necessary on this zigzag line of truth. The last one that I think the three nominees that were the best of the nominees is Kash Patel. And I tried to write about him. I never published it, but he called for transparency in the FBI. Okay, if we had transparency, I know this from being a legal counsel in the FBI. In the affidavits that the FBI has to write in order to monitor the mafia. I was involved in this for 7 years. And those affidavits that we wrote were so carefully done, dot the I's and cross the T's, because, you know, all the Paul Castellano and I'm trying to think the Gambino family, the Colombo family, we did literally dozens of these monitoring Title III affidavits. Usually they were about 100 pages of laying out probable cause. You know why they were so carefully done and so withstand scrutiny? The reason is transparency. We all knew when we wrote those that they were going to be given to a jury. At some point in the future, people were going to, in the close future, the near future, they were going to be able to read those. And if somebody had lied in those affidavits or exaggerated or whatever, then it would come to light. That's why they were done so well. Transparency is everything. You go back to the FISA, foreign intelligence surveillance, those are classified secret forever. Well, guess what? They get to be quite sloppy, and to the point where you get Carter Page, who's this innocent person, and they make up lies about him. And it's just so when he called for transparency, again, cross your fingers whether he follows through on that. I mean, I don't know him personally.
My question is, will he be allowed to? Because we do know, I mean, I'm just saying, I want to do, as you know, realpolitik, and I've got Dr. Gibbs sitting in the waiting room. Don't leave. Just stay right there, Colleen Rowley, because you know how this works. And what I try to do is give people the benefit of how things really work. You can want to do something, and you get into office, and this is what they told Trump when he got in. They were like, yeah. Chuck Schumer said, look, the intelligence community's got 50 million ways to Sunday to jam you, and they will do that. He said, I'm not worried about him. And we saw that happen. You saw that happen to John Kennedy. I mean, you saw it happen to Carter.
You know, and there, by the grace of God, anyone who is threatened with their family. I do know of a few figures in history who have stood up to such threats on their own life. And actually one of them is Martin Luther King Jr. He was threatened terrible. Why don't you just commit suicide and whatever? I'm so, if you think about it, he's one of the main heroes of the United States because he stood up to those kinds of threats. With Kash Patel,
knowing that they were going to kill him. Let me just say that.
Yeah, I mean, if you get into these positions of power, it goes with the territory. It does go with the territory, and it goes with anyone seeking any kind of position of influence or leadership. So don't be naive. I know people think that the United States is the glowing city on the hill and these kinds of things would never happen. But the fact that they committed assassinations abroad in foreign countries in order to gain power and control, that all had a way of blowing back into the United States. And so when you're able to do that, they killed Lumumba in
the Congo.
In the Congo, and toppled Argentina and Iran and Vietnam. Yeah. So when you get that heady, when you are these positions, like Trump, like Obama and the CIA director sitting there on a Tuesday saying the kill list. Okay, he gets killed. He doesn't. If you play God, there was a theologian that one time talked about playing God. You start playing God with life and death, and you know what? You start believing you're capable of anything. And yes, then it actually, and you'll see this, a lot of it has migrated back into the United States. And it's obviously, that kind of dirty tricks, the dirty tricks that the CIA pulled to rig elections. Well, guess what? We have Bernie Sanders, who's the victim of a rigging election, not terribly different than the way we rigged the election for Yeltsin in Russia. So again, this is the problem. If people could look at the bigger picture of what our really sordid foreign policy has led to. And again, I don't know if it'll be fixed. Going back to Kash Patel, he has faced it down a little bit. He's been threatened already and had to move. He had to move his entire family.
Really?
So yeah, and so he's already seen the really sad, dark side of that cabal. That doesn't mean he can continue to face it, whatever, but he has surmounted it once. By the way, we don't even know if he'll be, I still think it's, 50-50 of whether the Senate will even confirm him. I don't think it's a sure thing, even though Tulsi and Robert Kennedy got confirmed. So I've written, VIPs, our veteran intelligence professionals, you'll have to wait for it. I'll send it to you. Our veteran intelligence professionals has drafted another memo to these three, to Tulsi, to Robert Kennedy, and to in a way supporting the fact that they're calling for things like transparency. It's supporting their calls for these things. It's a support for calling for depoliticizing and restoring trust in their agencies. And it's a call for decentralization, which is what Kash Patel called for. It's not necessarily to say we support you personally on all levels, No, it's because Patel has called for some good things. And again, we'll have to see if he even gets through. And then, you know what? We'll have to see if he holds to his promises. Again, I'm not sure about, because you're right. I said breathing the air in Washington, D.C. is so full of corruption. Menendez that we just got convicted to prison. He's not the only one. Oh. Duke Cunningham before him holding the orgies. All these congresspersons and senators corrupt as heck. And we only know the tip of the iceberg. The ones who actually look at Eric Adams in the mayor of New York. Yeah. You know what? I think all of those U.S. attorneys and assistant U.S. attorneys who resigned, I think they're right. Eric Adams is corrupt, and so these kinds of things are public corruption. Now we've become desensitized to it.
Mm-hmm.
And, so we almost think, oh, well, that's normal. They're all on the take. They all come in with, very poor. They come into office very poor. I know this is a very big digression, but our Norm Coleman in Minnesota,
Yes.
since we're talking to AM 950, our Norm Coleman, who was elected senator, he was so poor.
Or something like that. He succeeded. I'll just say, I will give him, he succeeded Paul Wellstone. I'm not over that yet.
Yeah. He was the poorest, least wealthy senator. He had to live in somebody's basement in Washington because he could not afford to even rent an apartment. Someone helped buy his business suits. This all came out afterwards. A wealthy donor was buying him business suits. He was living in somebody's closet in Washington. He was so poor. He's worth multi-millions now. And this is the case of they find ways to funnel this money into their own pockets. And, Samantha Power, I just read a thing. She had some money. Her husband was a Harvard professor. They had, maybe some millions. She's now worth like 30 million or something. Mm-hmm. So when they get into these positions of power, and you know what? We all kind of think, oh, that's normal. The Clinton Foundation was a way of doing these slush funds of a lot of foreign money, by the way, foreign money coming in. I mean, it's like, that's not normal for our elected leaders to be pocketing this kind of money. You know why? It's like Menendez. If you're taking gold bars, if you're getting gold bars for this, there's something wrong with that. Anyway, I'm going to have to go, but yeah, people need to realize the truth is a zigzag line, and you know what? There's no virtue. There's no side has a corner on virtue. Absolutely. And they might do something good, and then they might do something bad. I don't look for Trump. I'm really worried about the Trump administration, and that would include Patel, Tulsi, and Robert Kennedy now restoring the genocide on Gaza. I'm worried about that. So I am very worried that they would do that. It's not all good or all bad, but applaud the good. I just thought of one more thing to leave with. Frederick Douglass had an excellent quote, and it cannot be said enough times. Frederick Douglass said, "I would unite with anybody to do good and with nobody to do wrong."
That's right.
That is the best quote. I would unite with anybody to do good and with nobody to do wrong. And that's fasten your seatbelt, but keep that in mind.
Look, I'm telling you, that's one of the things I love about you, because to me, Dr. David Gibbs, and we've taken heat. This is, of course, a brilliant historian out of the University of Arizona. We've taken heat about Ukraine, about Gaza, about everything. I said, you know what? Someone said to me, you know what? She conflated her blackness with being a Democrat. I said, I can't sign on to that. I'm not going to do that. I said, what I'm going to do is try to do right, and that's it. Because I had a senator named Chuck Percy, who was a decent man, and he was a Republican. And had I been old enough to vote, I would have voted for him. Didn't agree with a lot of his domestic policies, but international policies, and I just felt that he was a decent man I could talk to, period. And that's just where I am on this. And you know what? Where these people veer off over here on Gaza, I'm going to fight you on it, because I think that you're wrong. Where you are on the Congo and Haiti, I'm going to fight you on it. But on denuclearization and talking to China and Russia, I'm going to support you. And if that means some of my brothers and sisters on the left are going to be upset with me, then you just have to be upset. Because this, what we're doing right now, is unsustainable. And that's it. At some point, you have to go beyond party, because both of these are two wings of the same flight. And this plane is not leading us into anything that is good. Dr. King told us this almost 60 years ago. And that's it. Colleen Rowley, everybody loves you here. And believe it or not, Dr. Gibbs, they love you here too. Even as they get upset with us, it's okay. Sending my love to you and your family. Do not go. She's a marathoner, and it's going to be 50 below zero wind chill in Minneapolis tomorrow. Let's not. Well, you heard us talking. And of course, we went over, but you know what? I guess, we've been talking about this because we're going to be talking about denuclearization with Medea Benjamin and with David Swanson from World Without War in another hour. In the next hour, we're going to be talking about the public school system. What's going to happen to that? There's just so much that's on the table, Dr. Gibbs. But this is something that I wanted you here because this is something that we've been talking about. Because as we're looking at Ukraine, and as we saw J.D. Vance in Europe last week, as we saw, as you mentioned yesterday, Marco Rubio saying, wait a minute, multipolarity. This is not a unipolar world. We've not heard anybody say that. Certainly no one on the left. But BRICS is real, Dr. Gibbs. I mean, the Francophone countries are kicking France out.
Yeah.
And the presidents of those countries and other people in the global south are daring the West to do anything to these presidents, because we do know that people who make these kind of moves, they get harmed. So, but they don't care. I mean, it's something else is going on here, Dr. Gibbs.
Well, I think what you are seeing is a political realignment in the United States on foreign policy, certainly. Well, it's looking that way anyway. Again, this is all subject to the asterisk that Trump can always change his mind. But in terms of what he's been saying, what he intends to do, this would be a dramatic break with past policy. It would also be a dramatic break with the foreign policy establishment, that sprawling thing that encompasses military-industrial complex, the bureaucracy, the think tanks, elite academia, the blob, as some have called it. Generally speaking, American presidents don't stray very far from the blob, even if they might want to initially. They usually fall into line. Trump, and Trump did, I should add, for the most part during his first term, including on Russia. There are indications that he may not do so this time, and he may simply break with the blob. And that would really be a remarkable change if he did that, if he's willing to essentially stand up to the foreign policy establishment and go his own way. That would be represent a realignment domestically and also a realignment internationally in terms of acceptance of multipolarity. No president up till now, since 1945, has ever indicated they were open to the idea of multipolarity. Trump appears to be the first who, at least his Secretary of State, has said he sees the world going in that direction. That is a break with the past, and a positive break, in my view.
Why do you think it's positive? Why?
Well, first of all, it's a recognition of reality. It is in fact happening and will happen. And there's nothing in the long term. There's nothing the U.S. can do to stop it. Recognizing reality is always a good thing. And also, I do think you could make a case that the United States has had I'll be very frank, pernicious role in the world, starting one war after another, one regime change after another with catastrophic consequences, bullying countries with sanctions, with threats of regime change. Such countries as Cuba and Venezuela have had to suffer under tremendous U.S. sanctions, damaging their populations. In the late 90s, Madeleine Albright, then about to become Secretary of State, was asked, what do you think of a UN report that U.S. sanctions have killed 500,000 children in Iraq? And she said, we think it's worth it. And so that's America's legacy. I would say on balance, the U.S. has had a much more negative legacy since the end of the Cold War than positive. And so if the U.S. can be weakened and its tendency to bully other countries can be reduced, that may end up as a positive. I say may because nobody knows the future. But I would certainly see that as a positive given past American activities.
What do you think is moving? What's moving him in this direction? I mean, to me, this is reality.
Yeah.
I keep trying to tell some of my friends, many of whom are on the left, said it's a different world out here. When you travel the world, and I do travel the world, but I read papers from all over all over the world every day, just like I read a lot of different papers. I read the LA Times. I think it's important, but I think it's important to read the London Times. I think it's important to read the Daily Mail. Yep, I know it's right wing. I get all of it. But I spent too much time in Europe. Not these are papers, the International Herald Tribune. These are things that I would read every day. And even what we have to understand is that Time has a German bureau, and they have their own edition of Time.
Yeah.
They have their own edition in Great Britain and in Japan, and they have their own takes on world affairs.
Right.
And things have really. I mean, people keep saying that Trump is shaking things up. I'm saying that people are shaking things up too, Dr. Gibbs. I mean, when you look at the politics all over the world, things are like moving.
Well, moving in odd ways, in that it used to be the case that Western Europe, even Britain, but especially the continent of Europe, and especially countries like Scandinavia, had been quite different in their reporting international affairs, and their policies differed somewhat, but their newspapers differed quite a bit from the American newspapers. My sense is that's not true these days, and there's a kind of moving in lockstep, a kind of narrowness of thought on both sides of the Atlantic beyond anything I've ever seen. To find alternative viewpoints, you have to go to places like India, South Africa. If you read Portuguese, Brazil, I don't read Portuguese, but I assume Brazil, that's. You are getting a situation. I don't know why this is, that Europe has become a vassal of the United States, and it remarkably is doing so at a time when the U.S. has less power than ever before. So that's a conundrum for me. I can't really respond to, but I think in terms of why Trump is taking this very independent stance, I think it reflects the fact that there's something to his claim to be an anti-establishment candidate. The establishment does hate him. There are good and bad reasons for this. I think the good reason is he does act a little crazy and says crazy things. There's no doubt about that.
But also, that is tactical, though, Dr. Gibbs.
Well, that's quite true. Some of it's certainly tactical. There's no doubt. On the other hand, when you have, for example, Elon Musk giving the Sieg Heil salute, even if it was quote unquote a joke at the inauguration, the most polite thing I can say about it is that's really weird. No.
He's an Afrikaner. He's an absolute.
Well, that's true, but he also has a lot of influence.
And he has a lot of influence.
Yep.
If Steve Bannon can call him an out-and-out racist, I mean, this is Steve Bannon. You help to usher this in.
Yeah.
Because just as a Black person, I see an Afrikaner and go, wait a minute. And this is. No, I'm not saying that you don't. I'm just saying when I look at him, I'm like, are you serious, Peter Thiel? I mean, and we have this whole South African diaspora who are here. They're growing in influence, and no one is talking about it.
Yeah, it's true. And also things like trying to get white South African farmers who are, in quote unquote, being persecuted because they're having their land seized.
They're having
that's the right kind of immigrant. There's all sorts of disturbing things, and that's true. And that's
the land that they took from African people. Yeah,
that's right. That's absolutely right. But the fact is basically that it should not obscure that Trump is saying some things that look quite positive. And, it's an awkward situation because on the one hand, you don't want to say nice things about somebody who's doing exactly what you said about wanting to, bring Afrikaners into the United States, even as he's throwing out other immigrants from less worthy countries, it would seem, or less worthy skin colors, perhaps. That's all true, but nevertheless, it should not obscure the fact that on certain aspects of foreign policy, he's saying remarkable things that could have remarkably positive effects. And I agree with Colleen Rowley that you have to do this on a case-by-case basis. Yeah. And where Trump's doing ugly things, including on domestic policy, neoliberalism is going to reach new heights under him, we condemn him. But that should not prevent us from supporting him when he wants to do things like massive cuts in military spending, or denuclearization, or cooperation with Russia and China. Those are positives. And so Trump is a very, very, very mixed bag. And but he could nevertheless produce some significant positives on foreign policy. Certainly he's talking that way. By the way, again, on Israel-Palestine, he has produced the ceasefire. Who knows if that'll hold? But, just recently, Marco Rubio used the word eradicating Hamas. I don't like Hamas, but using the word eradicating.
What is
Yeah, that's given what Israel's doing, which you could say is eradicating in a literal sense of the term
Yeah.
eradicating. A lot of people who are not Hamas are being eradicated as well. That's a disturbing thing to say. But again, we have to accept that the Trump administration is not just complicated, but much more so than most presidencies. And we don't have to trust or like or love or in any way praise Trump in general to see that he can do some positives.
Dr. David Gibbs, you want to say something to help close this out? Because it's
Well,
a lot of things are being thrown at us at one time, and it's
at one time, very fast, very fast. That's quite true. I suppose one more thing I would say is that something everybody's forgotten about, but Trump seemed to have remembered, is the issue of nuclear weapons and the danger of nuclear war. This is an enormous risk, which reached historic heights during the recent Ukraine war, and nobody's noticing it. Nobody's talking about it. The activist left has completely forgotten about this. Ironically enough, Trump seems to be reviving it as an issue. And again, if he can even raise this as an issue and even better do something about it, well, that's to the good.
Well, hey, everybody, I think that denuclearization, talking to China and Russia,
Yeah.
I think it's important. And speaking to others who have the nukes, we need to talk to them too. Because we need to make sure that they're not using big nuclear weapons or the low grade nuclear weapons, because there's evidence that that's been used over in Gaza, everybody. So we have to keep on talking. The revolt of the rich, boy, are they having a field day right now.
Yeah,
we need this book more than ever. Did you write it about Elon Musk and company?
I haven't not written about him yet. No.
I think you were doing. I think Lil Till, you talked about remote viewing. Yeah, I know, and I know that they do that. The CIA and intelligence communities do that. I think he's a remote viewer, Little Toe. I think that's what Dr. Gibbs is. He's just telling you what we're dealing with right now. Coming up, everybody. Let's
Bye,
talk
everybody.
about sending you so much love, everybody. Let's talk about the Department of Education. Let's talk about public education in the United States of America. Please meet me over in the next hour of the Santita Jackson Show. I have a lot of good stuff coming up for you today. So stay right here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Back in just a moment.